What is the Raspberry Pi 4? The Raspberry Pi Foundation has released a new version of its flagship model, the Raspberry Pi 4. In addition to the models that come with 2 GB and 4 GB of RAM, there's a new 8 GB model. You'll be able to run applications that require more RAM, whether you use the Raspberry Pi to run a server or as a desktop computer. What is the difference between Raspberry Pi 3 and Raspberry Pi 4? Here's a full list of the Raspberry Pi 4's improvements over its predecessor, the Raspberry Pi 3B+. Quad-core 1.5 GHz Broadcom CPU, up from 1.4 GHz in the previous model. 500 MHz video core VI GPU, up from 400 MHz previously. A USB Type-C port for power, rather than micro-USB. 2 micro-HDMI ports which can power 2 4K monitors at 30 FPS, or a single 4K monitor at 60 FPS alongside a 1080p display. 2 USB 3 ports and 2 USB 2 ports, up from 4 USB 2 ports. A Gigabit Ethernet port which is no longer throttled by a USB interface. Bluetooth 5.0 rather than 4.1. Dual-band 802.11 GHz Wi-Fi. A microSD storage card with a theoretical maximum transfer rate of 50 megabits per second, up from 25 megabits per second. A 40-pin GPIO connector with support for 3 more interfaces, I2C, SPI, and UART. What operating system does Raspberry Pi 4 use? Most people use something default like Raspbian. Because it's the default and it has the community. Personally, I own more than 20 Pis and have like 10 running around the clock. And given my daily on desktop is Arch Linux, I too use Arch Linux on all of my Pis. What you expect from the Raspberry Pi 4 Model B? Raspberry Pi 4 should have same $35 price point. A better quad-core like Snapdragon 820 series. At least 2 GB of RAM. RAM should be DDR3 not DDR2. A Gigabit Ethernet port. USB 3.0 if possible. Open source files about GPU. Better GPU clock speed,